Before we begin, I'd like to give a special thanks to Akumaz, Thelsil, and Tai for helping me with feedback and suggestions, as well as offering a different perspective and pointing out issues that I was not previously aware of.
And of course, a special thanks to the community manager for the game.
Additionally, I'll be linking all the forums to get in contact with the Wolong developers down in the description, such as the Wolong Discord, the official Koei Tecmo Discord that has a Wolong feedback channel, the Koei Tecmo feedback forum on their site, the Wolong Twitter page, as well as the Reddit posts I made about this same topic on the Wolong subreddit. The developers have not only stated, but have proven time and time again that they are listening to our feedback. Wolong Fallen Dynasty. Since the release of Wolong on March 3rd, the developers have been regularly updating the game, consistently adding enjoyable content, such as the Battle Royale modes, new difficulties, the first and second DLC out of 3 planned, with the third one being announced to arrive on December 12th. The 1,000-mile journey mode, which, I do have to add, warmed my heart that they added an invasion stage. Such a sweet addition for us PvPers. They've also been doing all kinds of crossovers with other games like Naraka, Lies of P, and their very own Neo. We also got a crossover with the clothing company. Yes, I pre-ordered a pair of the Edwin jeans. They have continually fixed numerous bugs. The Venom Snare still proccing on deflect, duped special items clogging the inventory, falling through the map when swapping weapons being some of the best ones I remember, but they fixed many others. They've made numerous adjustments to things like weapon movesets, like changing recovery, the weapon speeds, turning capabilities during attacks, adding armor break to some weapons, adding spirit cells to all of them, but some more than others, holding attack to constantly swing the staff, etc. They've balanced out wizardry spells, though there are a few outliers that still need some slight tuning. Adjusted tons of martial arts, even make adjustments to many of the bosses, which I would list here, but if I'm being completely honest, I would just butcher all the pronunciations for the names. Several patches ago, they even drastically increased accolade rewards for pretty much all multiplayer activity. And they've made some progress, albeit slowly, towards making accessories reasonably attainable, but I'll go over that some more later on in the video. Huge amounts of quality of life features are constantly being added to the game as well, such as allowing co-op players to skip cutscenes after a boss fight so they can leave the session, improving mouse controls, consumables and ammo restocking when resting at a battle flag. Love that one. Settings for switching targets after deflecting, saving inventory sort options, interdiscipline option, allowing people to visit the blacksmith between missions during co-op, swapping martial art inputs, true martial art swapping, implementing the training grounds, improving the drop rates across the board every few patches, increasing the cap on things like chi, hooves, and gems, pandas, tablets, dragon essence, cicada shells, and dragon crystals showing up on the mission icons. Probably a huge number of things I'm leaving out, but you can see all of the changes they've made to the game on their news page. I'll link it in the description. They've even given us a roadmap. Though at launch, PC performance was quite painful, they've continued to optimize the game better and better, on PC and on console. I remember when the game first came out, it continually crashed when I tried to invade, as well as experiencing general connection instability with many other players. But now it's much more stable. Though after the latest patch, the game has been crashing when engaging in 1,000-mile journey invasions. Though I know there are still a number of people on PC experiencing stutters, they've shown dedication to improving things, with some of the latest few patches increasing performance much more significantly. I know it's not quite perfect. There are still a handful of issues, and I'll address them in order of a combination of significance and how often they're requested by the people in the community. I'm sure nobody is surprised about this, but one of the most highly requested and at the same time most technically demanding features to implement would be true cross-platform abilities for multiplayer. With the way it's currently set up, there is kind of a form of crossplay. PS4 and PS5 players can play together, Xbox players and Microsoft PC players can play together, and Steam sits off to the side in the corner alone. Now, Team Ninja games are already a little niche, but even for a Team Ninja game, Wolong has less players than the Neo games do on Steam. As a result, the activity for Wolong on PC for finding multiplayer sessions is pretty much abysmal. Activity is decent on consoles, especially PlayStation, but again, the game is really niche. Cross-platform, though being extremely tedious to implement, would help this game survive long-term. If we brought all 3 platforms' player pools together, activity would be consistently decent. You'd basically always have at least a handful of people to play with, but matching with random players aside would allow you to play with anybody who has the game. All too often, you meet someone in some online space that actually plays the game, then after talking about it a bit, you both realize you're on different platforms and can't play together. I mean, I can't even play with my other family members. I play on PS5, my dad plays on PC, and my brother plays on Xbox. At this point, I'm heading on towards 800 hours on this game, and the only reason I'll ever stop playing it as consistently as I do would be if I can't find other people to do PvP with. I know I asked on Twitter a few months back and got the response saying it wasn't currently planned, but man, if there could be some reconsideration for it, even if it wouldn't be happening for, I don't know, like the next 6 months or something, it would still make everyone who engages in multiplayer so much happier. And as for issues that could arise from introducing cross-platform, such as more cheaters from the PC platform, or I think PC has 120 frames per second, whereas console has 60, just create a system like we currently have in place, where there would be toggles for each platform, and allow these to come on by default, of course. That way, if people don't want to engage with a certain platform at a certain time, they can just toggle it off, but if they have maybe a friend that wants to play on PC with them, then they can play with them. Then all they'd have to do would be toggle it on for that session, and then turn it off when they're done playing with that person. Anti-cheat. The improvements to the anti-cheat system in one of the most recent patches are a huge step forward. However, it has not entirely prevented cheating, it seems, even on console. I ran into a couple of cheaters after the patch myself. Here's a few clips. Basically, it seems it's much more difficult to have cheated embedments on equipment. However, people can still cheat the upgrade level of a piece of equipment to an absurdly high and illegitimate value. Fixing this would further reduce the amount of cheaters playing online. More on performance. On console, the game occasionally freezes here and there, especially after winning an invasion, and will crash on occasion, especially when invading or leaving an invasion. The likelihood of it happening seems to go up when invading in the 1,000-mile journey. Yes, I have prioritized frame rate on. Many people are also reporting the game crashing during cutscenes on PS5. I've experienced this myself a handful of times, and seems to be happening the most frequently with the DLC cutscenes of both DLC 1 and DLC 2. The performance in the stage Battle of Hulao Pass is also bad in multiplayer on console, namely the portion of the level that's raised up with all the soldiers and ballistas. I still see people, and a few of my friends, making reports on poor performance on PC, though I see a lot more commenting on there being increases to performance since the last several patches. I cannot attest to this myself, however, as I play on PS5, and PC performance is already something the developers are aware of and have been addressing. Glitches. Very recently, Pandas had a glitch where the accessories they dropped had a chance to have duplicate effects rolled onto them. Now, the bug was fixed, but the accessories remained in people's inventories, completely unchanged. This created a situation where people who farmed accessories during that time have some extremely strong accessories that are completely unobtainable for everyone else. I myself have several that are, well, kinda insane. Right before these bugged accessories were introduced, there was a bug with accessories where the premium slots were messed up. Those accessories had their bugged effects re-rolled. If the same could be done for the new bugged ones, it would be greatly appreciated. In the case that they truly can't be fixed, maybe as an alternative, possibly all 7-star accessories would work like they did when they were bugged. Could have multiple of the same embedment on them. That way all players would at least have equal access to the accessories. I'll touch on accessories again a bit later in the video, as they still have more issues aside from the bugs. And apart from the accessory glitch, it appears that you can no longer chain attacks after performing a deflect counterattack. This further de-incentivizes their usage, and they're already in dire need of some kind of buff to make them worth using. So maybe it was some kind of oversight. Now on Arena. If you weren't aware, unlike the first Neo game, Wolong has no dedicated arena system. Instead, we have the mission Realm of Battle, and it has a lot of issues. I'll start by listing off the thing it did right. You see, Realm of Battle shows up in the list of invadable locations when queuing. This increases activity for it, whereas if it was a separate arena mode and not a mission as well, activity would be much sparser. Because it's set up like a mission, that means people looking for standard invasions might go there for a duel on occasion when they see it pop up. Now, what are its problems, you might ask? Firstly, the map size. The size of the map is pretty good for the situations where there are 3 players versus 2 invaders, but the map is most commonly used for 1v1s, and for those, it's just much too big, allowing players to stall for basically free. Plus, old maps such as these, or those of similar size, could be used as arena maps, making it even easier on the developers, as no new maps would need to be designed. I mean, look at these look great, and the size is really nice too. Then there's the whole problem of the host advantages. As I said before, Realm of Battle is most often used for duels, as we have nowhere else to really play duels. But the host gets twice the flasks as the invader, and the invader's damage and defenses get nerfed slightly, making it so we have no real way of setting up a fair duel. Next up is not the worst issue, but it certainly is very, very annoying. The doors. Does this look engaging to you? Sometimes people will wait for half an hour or more before opening the doors, and invaders can't do anything about it. Those can just sit there for as long as they want. There's no timer in place to automatically start the match. Now, with the host being in full control of the doors, if the host buffs and enters the doors the moment an invader comes in, they get the buffs free of any spirit cost before the invader has a chance to do the same. And these buffs can visually desync at times, and I'll touch again on that later, but that gives them an additional advantage over the invaders. And I think having host advantages is perfectly fine for a normal invasion, but when you're trying to set up a duel with someone, it's just really annoying how one player has such a tilted advantage over the other. Now, this is probably the least of Realm of Battle's issues, but it's still an issue nonetheless. No password duels. There's currently no way to set up a duel with a specific friend without the chance of someone else intruding. The solution to make these password duels fair is to disable accolade gain for them and make them not show up on the list of invasions carried out or whatever. So people can't farm rewards. It would solely be for having fun with a friend rather than cheesing the accolade reward system. The way I see it, there are two ways to solve these problems. Either make a dedicated arena mission, or just improve Realm of Battle by fixing all of its issues. I'll go over them. Now for a dedicated arena. Similarly to the one in Neo, a dedicated arena could allow multiple players to queue for a certain game mode, 1v1s or even team matches. The maps for duels would be small, and the ones for team matches could be much bigger. Since no player would be considered a host, there would be no side with an inherent advantage. No player dealing a higher base damage or having higher base defenses, and both players would have the same amount of flasks, resulting in fair duels and fair team matches. The matches would start automatically for both sides, eliminating the door issues, and a password system could be implemented which would not grant rewards when used to allow private sessions for sparring. If the queue for these modes would also show up on the invasion queue as well as a separate queue for those matches specifically, that would help keep it active. You could even include a queue for the team matches into the invasion queue and the co-op queue, as some might just be interested in cooperating with a team against another team. Alternatively, the Realm of Battle mission could just be fixed up, though it would be much less beneficial, and it might compromise its use as a place for team fights. The adjustments could be something like this. Have the flasks of the host, remove the damage and defense advantage from the host, implement a 60-second timer before the fight automatically begins, to prevent people from camping the map. Also, adding a timer to the gates on 1,000-mile journey invasions would be a massive improvement. Allowing a system where people can use a password to fight on this map, or any map actually, but forfeiting all rewards in the process. Maybe reducing the map size? The issue with this is it's not limited to 1v1s, so reducing that would make it too small for team battles. So maybe have the game load a map that's much smaller when dueling, but load the normal one during team fights. Either implementing a dedicated arena or simply improving Realm of Battle like this would drastically improve the PvP experience. Now for the other issues that accessories have. When it comes to PvP, or just build making in general, the toughest barrier new players face is farming. The developers have been consistently improving the farming process since release. However, the only major farming barrier that still remains is accessories. You see, even with the addition of the Panda embedment priority feature, you still can't get the ideal accessory, because the ideal accessory looks something like this. And you see these white embedment slots? When you drop a piece of equipment with the effects in the order you want for a Panda, the white embedments get moved down lower, meaning you can't get them to be put in the premium slots up here. So even though in theory, it's easier to get the accessory you want, in reality, you still have to just farm for the completely random ones and just hope you get all the different effects you want in the right order. This could easily be fixed by changing the way the Panda embedment drop priority works very slightly. Just make all of the embedment types drop in the same order as the item they were dropped in. For example, say I dropped an accessory like this for Panda. Make it so the accessories I receive back have all of these embedment types dropped on the new accessories in the same order, including the white ones. Alternatively, you could create some type of panda that would appear as, say, a 1 out of 10 chance in the level exploration stages in 1000 Mile Journey. Add this panda for the cost of maybe 500 golden hooves, maybe more than that. You can embed a single slot on an accessory to be whatever you'd like. Getting the ideal accessory would cost a ton of hooves and still require a large amount of time and effort, but would realistically be possible and something to work for. And pandas would still remain relevant in the process. Regardless, accessory glitches aside, the accessory farm in the current state is just the worst aspect of this game when it comes to build making. It's just basically nigh impossible to get a perfect accessory. The morale system. Now, this system has been debated all over for both multiplayer and single player, and in its current state, though improved, still does not work well for multiplayer at all. Primarily for invaders, but even for the host team on occasion. This is most notable during invasions in the 1000 Mile Journey, where one side may have a significantly higher morale level, leading to the opposing side being killed in one light attack in some cases. This can happen to hosts and co-operators as well as invaders, and needs a change of some kind to make multiplayer a little bit more fair and engaging. One possible change is, when an invasion session begins, cap every player in the session, including the invader, to the same morale level. Kinda like the purple flag buffs that last a temporary amount of time. Maybe make it calculated by rounding up or down the morale level of each member on the host team to a certain degree, and then matching the invader to that value. This would ensure that fights start at a baseline of fairness for all players involved, and won't allow people on any side to simply be one-shotted by basic attacks purely because of the morale level. Balancing adjustments. To be completely honest, the game is in a fairly balanced state.
However, before I get into the details about overall balance, I need to address something very important about the weapon viability overall. And that's the fact that many weapons have running attacks that are just way too slow to be viable in PvP. If all weapons had their running attacks sped up to become unreactable, this would allow every weapon to be able to compete with each other to a much more balanced degree. And considering that the developers have already been speeding up attacks all across the board already, this would fall right in line with the decisions that they've already made. If every weapon had an attack that was unreactable, it would force people to predict rather than react to some of the attacks, therefore increasing the depth of the combat overall in PvP. It would also enhance weapon diversity as well, bringing many new options to the table.
The entire sword category, but more specifically the straight saber category, basically reigns over all of the other weapons by a decent margin. In PvE, you can just do this. And in PvP, it has an absolutely amazing running attack, great light attacks, great damage, 2 additional spirit cells, and Moonbreak, which in PvP is fairly low risk if you have good spacing, as the wave part of the martial art won't stagger you if it gets deflected, You only get staggered if the sword part gets deflected, plus you can use Moonbreak after deflecting a critical blow for a massive punish. Singular swords are also the only weapons that get a dash attack animation following a missed directional deflect. If all weapons had that or something similar, it would balance things out a little more, and would also create a more general depth to the combat across the other weapon types. It's not the most unhealthy weapon meta, but I do think that other weapons should be buffed a little bit more to compete better with sabers. However, longswords seem pretty close to them in terms of weapon strength. When it comes to graces and equipment bonuses, there are only 2 graces that are really meta in PvP, Fuxi and Zurong to an extent, which is kind of a shame. It would be rather nice if more were buffed up to also become strong choices for PvP, and maybe additionally some PvP focused graces could be added in DLC 3. Just would be nice to have some more build diversity, of course. As for wizardry spells, because of the nature of the rock, paper, scissors type element system, most aren't problematic at all, really. However, there are 2 in particular that just promote poor play from the users, and the counter turns into either a game of disable the buff just for them to immediately recast it, or simply wait it out, which with one of the spells just isn't really realistic due to the nature of its issue. The suggested balance changes for these spells would not really affect their usage in PvE, and they would still be quite strong for PvP, just not so absurd. First on this short list is the spell Enhanced Defense. This spell allows you to ignore the incoming stagger received from attacks, and even from being deflected, with the exception of being hit by critical blows or someone deflecting a critical blow. For starters, this spell requires a measly 2 in Earth to use and 3 Morale to use without penalty, meaning that basically everyone has access to it, which by itself isn't the problem. Plus it's somewhat cheap to actually cast, and the cast time for it is quite fast, meaning if you try to hit someone with a wood spell to disable it, such as Lightning Bolt, they can simply deflect it and immediately recast the spell. Now the problem with this spell is when it's active, it allows players to rush up and basically mash attack without consequence, and the counterplay for it is much more demanding than the effort put in when utilizing the spell. You basically have 4 choices when fighting it, if your opponent knows what they're doing. Just disable it with a wood spell, Lightning Bolt being available on all builds, but if they deflect it, they can just recast it again, so it's just a back and forth scenario. Just wait it out. This tactic is extremely inefficient and just exhausting, as they can rush you without worry of being stunned. Plus, even if you do successfully wait it out, they can just recast it immediately. Deflect all of their incoming attacks and keep your distance to minimize chances of being hit. You have to play quite passively, and the most efficient way to land an attack is to trade with a martial art, such as Reactive Slash on longswords or Moonbreak on a saber, as these will stun them. But martial arts aren't the easiest thing to land in PvP and carry a high level of risk to use, as if deflected, lead to a very large punish. This entire option requires significantly more effort and caution than the player who has Enhanced Defense on. Whenever it's active, they can simply rush up almost without worry and apply a lot of pressure for free. The last counter would be to just use Enhanced Defense yourself. This basically makes the match boil down to either backing off until the other player's buff runs out, trying to disable the other player's buff, playing extremely passive and waiting for the occasional attack or significant deflect opportunity, or just mashing attacks into each other. It takes away from part of the main gameplay loop of PvP, which is deflecting, reads, and timing your attacks well to surprise your opponent. It just turns the game into a stalling simulator or button mashing session. The main suggested change for this spell would hardly touch its use in PvE at all. The suggestion is to simply still allow the stun from when a light attack gets deflected to remain even when the spell is active. When a player gets deflected by another player in PvP, the player that deflected them is guaranteed a singular light attack to be followed up as a punish. If they could still land that light attack guaranteedly after successfully deflecting their opponent, even when Enhanced Defense is up, it would allow some fair counterplay to the spell, while allowing it to retain the significant strength of not allowing you to be stunned by light attacks themselves, as well as increased defenses for its duration. It would still be an extremely useful spell, and this change would barely affect the spell's use in PvE at all. Another option would be to remove the ability to not be stunned by being deflected, and remove the ability to not be stunned by other players' light attacks, but compensate the spell by significantly increasing the amount of defense it gives the player, or at least removing the stun from being deflected and lowering the stun duration from being hit by light attacks, rather than removing it entirely. Basically, you'd recover from the stun faster than normal when getting hit, but it wouldn't remove it entirely. You'd compensate it by, of course, increasing the defense by a reasonable amount. Either of these changes would make the spell somewhat useful, but it likely wouldn't be meta anymore with this change. I'm also not sure if it would be realistically possible, or if it might require a significant amount of work to categorize player attacks specifically into the category of attacks that still stun while the opponent has enhanced defense up, as I don't think the spells should be effective in PvE too much, so I think the first change suggested would be much more reasonable. And yet another option that would change it, but make it fun and still relatively viable, would be to replace Enhanced Defense's current effect from increasing defenses and removing most hit stun, to instead the same effect that axes and hammers have inherently, which is adding a lot of hyper armor during attacks, and granting whatever weapon you're using the guard point ability, granting the user brief immunity at the beginning of an attack while the buff is active. This change would drastically change the spell's use, but given an interesting ability that would be much more reasonable to play against, and require a level of skill and strategy to effectively use. The other spell that needs a slight change is Perfect Restorer. You see, this spell is perfectly fine in a 1v1 scenario. It's easy to remove, has a high spirit cost, a wood requirement of 30, a morale rank requirement of 15 to use without penalty, and though its effect can be useful, it only works once. So for duels it requires some strategy to use effectively. Even in a 2v1 invasion scenario, it's mostly fine, though a little annoying. The main issue is when it's used by 3 players facing 1 invader. This spell, when cast by one of the 3 players, applies the buff of negating the next attack received to every player in the party. Not only that, but it doesn't have to be used with any amount of thought or strategy. The most common way it's used is by the members of the host team casting it while at low spirit, but them being at low spirit doesn't really matter in most situations, as when you hit them once to disable it, or use a spell to disable it, landing a follow-up attack afterwards is very risky, and sometimes is just not possible without being killed by another incoming series of attacks. Basically, this creates a scenario where all 3 players are almost invincible, because even if you manage to deflect them while they're at low spirit, in most cases, you're unable to get a Fatal Strike, or say one player is reviving another player, you are unable to interrupt this even if the player attempting to revive is at 0 spirit, because you won't be able to get 2 hits in a lot of the time. The suggested change for this wouldn't affect its usage for PvE, and would only really change its usage for people attempting to use it extremely poorly in PvP. The simplest change to give it would be allowing the Fatal Strike stab to bypass the spell's effect. Basically, if someone has their spirit disrupted, even if they have the spell active, they can still be Fatal Striked, as if they didn't. This would still allow the spell to be extremely strong in a 3v1, and still oppressive even. It would just require players to have to use at least a little bit more thought when casting the spell, and give invaders a tiny bit more of a chance to punish people playing extremely poorly. Whilst the video editing process came to a close, after further discussion and experimentation, we decided to add a third spell in the list of those that need slight adjustments. The spell Devouring Flames, while requiring 40 in fire to cast and 7 morale to use without penalty, has too many strengths compared to other offensive spells. The spell already has the strength of being very fast, though punishable, but aside from the speed and decent damage it can apply on the right build, the stun duration it causes upon landing is much too long, which in some cases can allow some ridiculous combos after landing a spell that's fairly difficult to react to at point blank. Apart from the stun duration, the trail of flames it leaves on the ground can also apply wizardry debuffs, resulting in it not only being a powerful tool for dealing damage, but causing it to double as a spell that removes opponents' wood buffs by applying additional negative effects on the opponent. The suggested changes for this spell are to reduce the length of the stun it applies on hit, and to remove the ability for the fire trail left on the ground to apply wizardry spell debuffs, and instead, only deal fire damage. This would still leave the spell with the utility of having a fast attack that can deal good damage, without making it as devastating to be hit by due to the combos it can create. Another PvP balancing suggestion is to add a sort of spirit cost decay system to deflecting. Basically, if you continually spam deflections without getting a successful one, each deflect attempt will cost more than the last one up to a certain point. This would punish people for playing poorly. Personally, I like the idea of it, as it promotes skillful play. The only possible downside is this would affect PvE balance as well, punishing players for spamming deflect without thinking and spamming deflect both in PvP and PvE. Now I'll go over some multiplayer bugs. There are still a number of multiplayer desync bugs that have yet to be patched, such as the all too common Stealth Fatal Strike desync bug that I'll show in these clips. There's another desync bug that appears to be caused when a host player enters the doors in Realm of Battle or the 1,000-Mile Journey. If they buff before entering the doors, sometimes their visual icons for their buffs are invisible on the bar above their head, leading to confusion where they have a buff active that their opponent isn't aware of. The spell Frozen Splinters will desync quite often when cast during multiplayer, causing it to be completely invisible to opponents. Flasks seem to just not work in multiplayer sometimes. Like, just look at this. A fix would be greatly appreciated. There's also this weird quirk with jumping attacks and some aerial martial arts in PvP. When one of these attacks is deflected by another player, the user doesn't get stunned, preventing them from being punished. Additional suggestions. This next segment is a much less important collection of suggestions and feedback that are low effort but may enhance the game's features regardless. White weapon embedment slots on weapons that aren't inherently part of a set. Many of us players are curious as to what will be done with the new 8-star rank being implemented in the new DLC 3. If the change to this new grade of equipment includes removing the one plain embedment slot that remains on these normal weapons and replacing it with, say, a premium slot, that would limit the weapon's viability, as there are embedments such as negate attribute damage upon guard, and more importantly than that even, the damage shift embedments. If all of the slots on these weapons are premium slots, we would be forced to waste a premium slot by placing one of these embedments in them, thus making these weapons less of a viable option, as other weapons will be able to take full advantage of the premium slots. The recent DLC 2 made these kinds of weapons much more viable overall, and added a handful of really good weapons to the pool, due to the fact that their primary locked embedments no longer conflict with the embedments placed on the weapon. Again, we have no idea what's in store for DLC 3, but would love for these weapons to remain viable by leaving at least one white slot on the weapons, with the addition of whatever type of slot or effect is being added to the new gear grade. NPC outfits. There are a number of outfits throughout Wo Long that are unobtainable for players, such as the blacksmith's outfit or Lady Zen's outfit, as well as numerous outfits worn by enemies or even a handful of bosses. I bring this up because, considering the models are all there, and would just need to be adapted to be worn by the player, in theory, it would be a low-effort way of adding a decent number of customization options to players, which players of all kinds can enjoy. They don't even need to be added to actual armor pieces. You could just add them to the list of decoration choices after the player meets a certain requirement. Accolade Shop Overhaul. The way it is currently, the Accolade Shop isn't very useful at all. It's actually just more entertaining to hoard accolades and watch the number go up, rather than actually spending them. This can be changed by simply adding more to buy from it, of course. From resources to maybe armor or weapons. You could even include the NPC outfits suggested earlier to this shop. Also, offering a guaranteed grade of equipment from the random accolade boxes would highly incentivize people to buy them. Currently, it just doesn't feel worthwhile to purchase those boxes, and adding more rewards would further incentivize players to engage in multiplayer. Uses for Chi beyond leveling up. If things remain the same as they are now, in DLC 3, Chi will be useless once you reach max level. If there was some way for us to maybe convert Chi into other resources such as copper, or even hooves if given a ridiculous amount to exchange for them. After max level is achieved, this is one suggestion that would prevent the currency from lacking a use. More fun titles. There seem to be quite a lot of players that enjoy collecting the titles, myself included. It's a given that there will be more added in DLC 3, and I think quite a few players would enjoy if more quirky or daunting ones were implemented, as well as a title for obtaining all titles. A small visual for the enchantment embedment. Though not necessary in the slightest, a cool change that I don't think many would be opposed to would be adding a slight elemental visual effect when putting an enchantment embedment on a weapon. For example, if I embedded the lightning enchantment on a ring pommel saber, small lightning bolts would come off of the weapon, similarly to using one of the elemental buffs on it. But the effect wouldn't be as large scale, just a neat little addition to make enchanting a weapon feel more significant, as the embedment is fairly uncommon and very powerful. I and quite a few other players have been playing this game somewhat frequently since the demo, and frequently engaging in multiplayer, PvP mostly, since day one. This game has quickly become one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite, in terms of combat and multiplayer mechanics. And seeing the developers continually supporting it with so many quality updates this long after release, with even more scheduled, makes me ecstatic. But the most important thing to me overall, more than the balancing issues, convenience features, or even content, is the longevity of the game, though all of those things do contribute to it greatly. I have to say though, the way the multiplayer and matchmaking systems were designed really helps with maximizing activity already, from the Wex Dust-esque level searching for finding players being there right from the start. Elden Ring added a similar system, but much later in its life cycle, and allowing you to match with other players regardless of character level, by using a level scaling system, is a massive help. However, due to the large gear difference between new players and players who have beaten every difficulty, endgame players do have a large advantage over new players. The activity on release was fantastic. You could find multiplayer sessions the second you queued for one, but naturally, as time went on, activity began to dwindle more and more, until DLC 1 released. Then it spiked up once again, and you could find sessions similarly to release, but it died down a couple weeks later. Then DLC 2 released not too long ago, and activity spiked greatly once again. It's just now beginning to dwindle, slowly. Currently, activity is not bad on PS5, but you'll often run into the same duelists with a mix of players you've never fought before here and there, as well as a fair amount of people PvEing through a level. At times it can take 1 to 2 minutes to find a fight, or even join a co-op session, but overall, activity isn't terrible. Though we don't have a good metric for analyzing the player count on consoles, we do have a chart for the PC, Steam version, like I showed before. Now if I had to guess, I wouldn't expect activity on PC to be the highest, due to its poor receival on the platform, namely due to performance issues and a plethora of cheaters. This can be seen in the reviews and forums. I would imagine the activity being decent on Xbox, as there is crossplay between the Xbox version and PC Microsoft version. Plus there's the fact that you can play it without having purchased it if you have Game Pass, making it much more accessible on the platform overall. And PlayStation is quite good for activity, as the platform hasn't suffered from any major performance issues and has crossplay between the PS4 and PS5 versions. As far as I can tell, it's been received very well on the platform. It was also in the popular sellers list during one of the PlayStation sales, if I recall correctly. Now since, to my knowledge, we don't have a solid way of checking the concurrent players on either of the console versions, I will just throw out a guess or example for the sake of discussion. Say on PlayStation we get twice as many players as we do on PC, Steam. That would be roughly 1,000 players on average, and on Xbox we get around the same amount. This is a bit low, and once all the content for the game is added, activity has a high chance of continually lowering. But what if we combine the activity? That would get us roughly 2,500 players, and this is just during the downtime, not considering a game sale on any of the platforms or new content or update, which is usually when it spikes up. As I mentioned around the beginning of the video, this game would greatly benefit from cross-platform play. The multiplayer in this game is addicting. I really don't want to see this game die down on activity so much to the point where it takes 10 or more minutes to find another player. And though time plus newer title releases will eventually kill activity in most games like this, it's still in its supported life cycle, and I want to see the game live a long while.
That's all I've got for now. Thank you very much for listening.